Welcome back to the RaiderLife.com. Today, a very special Charlie chat with wrestling legend Eric Bischoff, the bad guy. Folks, get out the NWO t-shirts, because he is the creator. WCW legend, WWE legend, TNA star, and host of Bischoff on Wrestling that you can hear across all podcast platforms. It is April 6th, 2017. We are fresh off Wrestlemania 33, where I had the pleasure to meet Eric. And it's the first time we're going to talk about it, folks. The league has voted to move those Oakland Raiders to Las Vegas. So in 2 years, our Oakland Raiders will be playing in Las Vegas, 2 to 3 years. And today's the first time we're going to get to discuss it. And I'm excited to be able to do that with such a marketing mind like Eric Bischoff, a man that understands territories all over the country and promoting brands and building brands. Very interested in getting his take on the whole thing. Also, it's interesting because all these defensive guys on the current squad that we've had on the show, we've been referring to this Raiders defense as the NWO. So I want to see how EB relates the Raiders to the NWO. Folks, tune in, buckle up. We got a good one for you. I'm your host, Charlie Boots, and you are tuned in to the Raider Life Podcast. This is Charlie Chat number 11 here on RaiderLife.com. And was it a special time up there in Orlando for WrestleMania? I got to check out my first WrestleCon, and I got to hit all the events with my good friend Jules, who's very tight with Kevin Nash and company. Went to Kevin Nash's after party. We had a great time, met a bunch of great guys. And I just want to thank you, and thank you, Jules, for showing me so many cool things. Jules referred to Eric Bischoff, folks, as the Al Davis of wrestling. I said, whoa, that's some comparison. But look at who brought the dark side to the WCW, turned Hulk Hogan evil, and changed the game forever. And I'm excited to bring him to you here today. So, folks, here he is on the RaiderLife.com. I'm not sure if he's a Raider fan, but he's a pure Raider. Wrestling legend, Mr. Eric Bischoff. Eric, how are you?
Raider is like, everybody wants to talk about, where I got the NWO idea from. That's pure Raider, brother. That's pure Raider. And it's great to be here. Thank you.
Man, it was cool to hear from Kevin Nash that he grew up a Raider fan, and that feels awesome to hear you say that the NWO, pure Raider.
No, it's partially true. I mean, it was all about attitude. It was all about breaking the mold, being different, and outside of the box. And when I was really, when I was younger, I was much more of an NFL fan than I am now. Man, the Raiders just epitomized that aggressive, out of the box, take no prisoner kind of attitude that I loved.
And, that's one of my favorite things about the Raider brand is the fact that there's 32 teams, but and there's a few iconic franchises, but the Raiders really do represent a whole attitude and aura.
They really do. They are the NWO of the NFL.
Man, oh man. All the defensive guys we have on, we call the defense the NWO. So I would love to see this year some NWO shirts underneath those pads.
I would love it too, and I'm sure Vince McMahon and company would as well. I saw a lot of NWO shirts this week at WrestleMania. I mean, it's amazing, an idea that literally just kind of came together. And 20 years ago, we created that NWO storyline. I'm still seeing NWO merchandise, all over the place, even at WrestleMania. It's great.
Yeah, I gotta say, man, it was awesome. I met Eric up in Orlando at the WrestleCon event, and this was my first WrestleMania. Man, it was incredible to see. It was like a Super Bowl, and the rooms, folks, were flooded with NWO merchandise still.
It still resonates to this day, and I think it speaks to the culture. People love that product, whether it's music, whether it's film, whether it's sport, that has that edge. That's probably why the UFC has become such a phenomenon, is because it's taken sport and combat to a whole different level because of the edge that it has. And I keep going back because we're talking about Raiders here, but same thing the Raiders did back in the really early 70s, mid 70s. It brought that edge to the game.
Man, and now that edge, this is the first time we're actually covering this on the show, and I'm happy it's with you, man. The Raiders just announced they're going to be headed to Vegas. What are your thoughts? Because I know you know Nevada, you know Vegas. What are your thoughts on the market? How do you think it's going to go? What do you think of the whole thing?
I think it is an absolutely huge move. It's going to make the Raider brand more powerful around the world than it's ever been. And it will probably transcend NFL fans and football. And I say that because, I mean, people from all over the world come to Las Vegas for an American experience, an entertainment experience. And it's going to expose the Raider brand and the Raiders as a team and their style of play to an audience that might not otherwise stumble across them. And as powerful as the NFL is, and as extensive as the brand awareness is across so many different platforms, and they're trying to expand into Mexico, and well, not trying, but they are expanding into Mexico and into the UK. But when you have people from all over the world coming to a single destination, and they want to experience that unique Las Vegas lifestyle, and a part of that lifestyle happens to be the Raiders, I wish I owned a piece of that team.
Yeah, it sure is going to be. I tell people it's going to be one of the hottest tickets in the world. But do you think that will last?
No, I think not only will it last, it will guarantee its perpetuity. Because you have a brand, you turn over new audiences every single week. It's great. And there's two ways to look at this, and it's one of the reasons why, to be very frank, I'm not as big a fan of the NFL as I used to be when I was younger. And that's, there's a couple reasons for that. As I've gotten older, and I enjoy being outdoors. That's one of my first priorities in life. So in the fall and in the winter, because I live in Arizona and Wyoming, depending on the time of year, on the weekends, I'm out riding horses, I'm up in the mountains, I'm fishing.
Wow.
I'm doing as much as I can do outdoors, because at this stage of my life, I realize, not to sound morbid, but there's only so many minutes left on my clock. And I want to experience as many of them as I can, enjoying the outdoors and being in nature. That means I don't generally watch a lot of football anymore. I just don't. And it's not because I don't love the game or I don't love being a fan. It's just because of my priorities. But another reason why I've kind of lost a little bit of the passion I've had for the NFL is because of free agency. Players move around so much and so often that it's really hard to identify with teams anymore, because they lose. It's not like back in the 70s and the 80s, when you identified with a team, whether they were winners or losers, you identified with that team, and that team was identified with that market. And I think there's probably going to be some blowback because the team is leaving Oakland and they're going to Vegas. So there's certainly going to be some blowback. But the reciprocal part of that side of it is that you've got, however many tens or hundreds of thousands of fresh new faces are coming into Las Vegas every week during the NFL season that are going to be exposed to the brand for the first time. So I think in the long term it's going to be such a great thing, but it's certainly interesting to watch.
You're right, though. You can't get used to that stable of characters. You can't get used to that group of guys, fall in love with them, because now you could just hope to hold on to one or two, maybe three marquee names, and that's it. And those are your top jerseys. But think about that. The 70s Raiders, it's almost like all 11 guys, both sides of the ball, plus some of the backups are household names. It
really is. And that, it's like, I look at the UFC, and clearly they're a phenomenon. The last thing I want to do is sound like I'm, taking pot shots at the UFC, because like I wish I owned a piece of the Raiders. I wish I owned a small piece of the UFC. But one of the challenges with the UFC is nobody stays around long enough to become a household name. The strength of the UFC is that on any given night, anybody can beat anybody. The downside of that equation is, other than a very small handful of people, nobody sticks around long enough to become a household name. Unless you're a really, really hardcore viewer, right? And a hardcore fan. They come in, they win a couple fights, and boom, they're done in a year or 2 years. It's over with.
Look at Rousey.
Exactly. Perfect example. And there's been a couple there's been a couple stars that have stood out and been around long enough, to make a name for themselves. But in the merchandising world and in the mainstream world, if you're not around for at least 2 years or 3 years, the lead time on your marketability is pretty extensive, and the lifespan of a UFC fighter is pretty short. And the same thing happens, I think, in the NFL, because teams move from city to city so regularly now that you just can't really identify with a market. Players move from team to team so regularly that you can't really identify with a team. So you end up becoming a fan of the sport and you love the game, but it's getting harder and harder to really develop a relationship with a team and its players.
Wow. That's an incredible point you make about the UFC and about building the brands, because even look at a guy like Chuck Liddell. Big fan of Chuck Liddell. I know Raider Nation is too, but the name brand isn't where it was 5 years ago. That I would say Conor McGregor has kind of figured it out, but we'll see how long it lasts. And a lot of that noise was made outside the ring. Do you think that some of these UFC guys transitioning into wrestling afterwards now, like if Ronda Rousey came out, I'm sure that would be huge to the wrestling world?
I don't think it would be, bro. I disagree with you.
Really?
Yeah, I think wrestling fans are a unique audience.
Right.
They're not as easily engaged as some people would think they are. And Ronda, she did a great job. And obviously, I don't know her. I've never met her. I'm sure she's a wonderful human being in many respects. So I don't want to sound disparaging in any way. But she came out and she portrayed this character. She was pretty aloof. She was this world-class badass. But when she took one on the chin, she turned to Jello. And she kind of, she became a recluse. She was a little bitchy, I guess. She was just, she treated, if she would have, Holly Holmes, if she would have respected Holly Holmes when Holly beat her in her first major loss, and just acknowledged the fact that she had a bad night, she just didn't win that fight, Ronda would have been, as they used to say in the wrestling business, over like Rover. She would have, even though she lost, she would have enhanced her respect in not only the UFC community but across the board. But instead, she got bitchy about it. And then when she came back, she portrayed this character in her big comeback, and then she dropped the ball again. And I think wrestling fans would feel like she's kind of like warmed over milquetoast and the last stop on the train. So I really don't think wrestling fans would embrace her the way people think. Now, they would have embraced her before the Holly Holmes fight. Absolutely.
Right. So while you're still winning, you can come in.
Yeah. And maybe even afterwards.
I get
if she would have left that Holly Holmes fight right, if she would have done the right thing, she could have come back. But I think after, 2 successive devastating losses and kind of being a world-class bitch in between, I don't think the audience is going to really embrace her.
That is a powerful point. Like, you're right. They're not going to want to feel like, okay, we're getting leftovers. They'd rather see new young faces they haven't seen.
Yeah, the wrestling audience, well, it's not only new young faces, but they just don't want to feel like they're the last stop on the train.
Gotcha.
The wrestling fans are way more sophisticated than people give them credit for.
Man, you've seen so much. It's crazy going from Detroit to hear that you spend half your year out in Wyoming. What's your favorite part about Wyoming?
I've always been, I'm 61 years old. I'll be 62 in May.
Looking like 35, 45, folks.
Ha.
As a kid growing up in Detroit, and I lived in a lower middle class part of Detroit. Everybody around us were, they worked in Ford factories or Chevy factories. It was the low end of the middle class scale. But westerns for me as a kid, and we didn't even have color television. We had black and white TVs. Watching television, we grew up. It was like Bonanza and all of the great westerns that I grew up with. So the West was always a fascination to me because when I looked outside my window, I saw, houses stacked on top of each other, and we each had a little 200 square foot, patch of grass in front of our house, and the only animals you saw were rats in the sewer, and, things like that. So for me, the idea of mountains and elk and deer and moose and wildlife, and all, to me, it was such a fantasy. It was like imagining, outer space in a way. So
right.
I got old enough to actually, bounce a half a dozen checks in order to put enough gas in my car to drive out west for the very first time in my life. It was like I was discovering another planet.
Yeah, we have mountains out here.
Yeah, and I mean, these are real mountains. Where I grew up, a mountain was somebody had an anthill on their front lawn. That was the closest thing you get to a mountain. But to see the Rocky Mountains and to see elk and deer and moose and grizzly bears and to smell the smells, I knew, when I was 22 years old, it was the first time that I went out west, that I'd ever been really west of Minnesota. I said, someday I'm going to live here. And it took me a while, about 20 years. But now when I go out there, I just, like I said early on in this conversation, when I go outside with my dog or I jump on my horse and go for a ride up in the mountains, the smells, the feel of the air, it's just, it still means the world to me.
Wow. I actually flew out west for my first time this year, man, and going over those mountains, it really is incredible to see. I can't wait to get out to Wyoming. I could only imagine, man, the vast wilderness out there. How many horses you got?
I'm down to 2. At one point I had like 9. I had 9 or 8, and it got stupid.
Too many wrestlers riding them, breaking them? What happened?
No. But I did a lot. I packed up into the mountains. I'd go up elk hunting for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 days, and I used horses to ride. But I also packed all my tents and gear and stuff on, and I got a little, like everything else I do in my life. Once I decide I like something, I tend to overdo it quite a bit. And I got seriously addicted to horses for several years, and ended up with, like I said, 7, 8, or 9 of them. I can't remember how many of them, but I eventually weeded them down. Now I have 2, one for me and one for my wife.
That is awesome. I'd love to go. When I come out to Wyoming, man, I'd love to ride a horse. Never rode a horse in my life.
You know what? I didn't start riding. I mean, I rode horses, occasionally throughout my life, like once every 4 or 5 years. But it wasn't until I started living in Wyoming that I really got into horses. And now it's like, I can't really describe it without boring your audience because it's such a cathartic.
No, it's got to be a rush. It's got to feel like a motorcycle ride, like.
Yeah, it's different, man, because a horse has a brain the size of a walnut. They're not highly intelligent. Yeah. A 1,200-pound horse has a brain that is about the size of a big walnut.
Wow.
They're prey animals, meaning they can't fight. They can't defend themselves. The only defense they have is to run, like a deer or an antelope or a jackrabbit.
It's a flight animal, right?
It's a flight animal, and everything around them feeds off them. So to be able to develop that bond and that trust when you're sitting on top of them, in my case, I'm about 200 pounds, and I'm sitting on top of the horse, which is totally alien to a horse. But when you're sitting on them, and to be able to communicate, and you communicate a horse with your body, with very subtle inflections of the way you move your hips or the inside of your legs or using your heels gently, just a touch of the reins, and you develop a language in a communication with a horse that is so, not to sound too crazy, but spiritual, that it's once you develop that relationship and you develop that line of communication, it is just absolutely fascinating what you can do with a horse.
Oh, man. You ever hear the song Silver Stallion by the Highwaymen?
Yes. Yeah, I'm a huge Highwaymen fan.
That's how I feel Wyoming would feel. You know what I mean? If I had to put it in a song, that's how I feel it would feel.
One of the best concerts I've ever been to was right after I started working in WCW. I was in Atlanta, and I was by myself. My wife was still living in Minnesota, and I was in Atlanta, and the Highwaymen were performing in a small little, I don't remember the name of the theater, but it was a very small, like 650, 700 seat, kind of theater in downtown Atlanta. And I went by myself, and it was the original Highwaymen, and still one of my favorite concerts of all times.
Wow. That sometimes, folks, that is a little gem right there. Sometimes that's the best way to take in a concert by yourself, because then you really get to feel it, experience it.
Especially when it's in a small venue like that. I saw Bruce Springsteen once in Denver. It was a acoustic performance. It was just Bruce Springsteen and an acoustic guitar. Same thing. Dinner theater type of environment, maybe 1,200 people tops. And,
wow.
Carlos Santana. My wife took me to Santana about 2 years ago.
Big Raider fan.
And we went. It was a House of Blues in Las Vegas, and literally I was 20 feet away listening to Carlos Santana, and it was just. I mean, it was. Again, not to sound too crazy, but it was like life-changing. When you sit that close to someone that awesome and amazing, it's life-changing.
Man, and I guarantee he's going to put on a beautiful show at the Raiders Stadium. Maybe this year in Oakland before they head out, because he's a big Raider fan. And that's cool to hear you say about someone, because, man, so you've been around so many great men. Who else gave you that feeling? Was there anyone in the wrestling world that gave you that feeling? Like, oh, man.
This is probably going to be somewhat inappropriate to say, but I've always, I mean, I loved wrestling. I grew up, as a kid in Detroit, really young. Saturday mornings, we only had one car, and my dad had to work Saturdays, so my mom would drive him to work, and then while my dad was at work, my mom would go grocery shopping, which meant that, I got left at home alone with my younger brother. And that was like, we were kids. I was like 6 and 8 years old, and that was like our time away from the parents, so we could do whatever we wanted to do, right? And we watched wrestling. We watched cartoons, but at the end of the cartoons, wrestling came on at 11 o'clock, and we watched it, and it was such a cool thing for us as kids, and wrestling stayed with me throughout my life. It's how I ended up in the business, because I just loved it. But I never looked at a character quite the same way, a wrestling character, quite the same way that I've looked at musicians. It's a different form of art. It's a different form of communication, and I can't really compare them. You can make comparisons. You can compare Shawn Michaels to Mick Jagger. You can compare Hulk Hogan to Elvis Presley. You can make those kind of general comparisons, but music and wrestling affected me differently.
That's amazing. So was that your favorite sport growing up? Was that where all your passion was, or were you personally pulled into a couple sports?
I was a very scrawny kid growing up. I wasn't very athletic. I ended up, it was Detroit, so I got in a fight every morning on my way to school. I got beat up for my lunch money every day around noon, and then I'd get in a fight every day on my way home from school. And that was just my life. And I generally came out I almost always came out on the short end of the stick, because I just wasn't a very tough kid. And there was a point in my life when I left Detroit and I moved to Pittsburgh. And because I grew up the way I grew up in Detroit, to me, getting beat up was just not that big a deal. And this is not me trying to sound like a tough guy. This was me just getting used to it. It was just like drinking a glass of water. It's just something you do every day. And I moved to Pittsburgh, and probably the second day of school at Pittsburgh, I was on a bus, and there was a kid in the back of the bus, and I was the new kid. I didn't have any friends, and I was still a scrawny little 14-year-old kid. And there was a kid, he was a high school at that time junior high, I guess, football guy, and he was a popular kid. And on the bus ride home, it was like a 40-minute bus ride home from school. He just kept binging me in the back of my head with his knuckle, and everybody would laugh, I just sat there, like for 40 minutes, this kid just kept, not hard, it wasn't like he was punching me, but he was just
trying to irritate
me in the back of the head. Yeah, and everybody got a kick out of it. And I was sat there for 40 minutes and went, you know what? I'm just not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. And the bus came to a stop, and his name was Kenny Stockline, if he's listening. But the bus came to a stop, and I stood up. And by that time, he'd been banging me in the back of my head for 40 minutes. So the last thing he expected me was to do anything. And I turned around and blasted him as hard as I could. And and all of a sudden, like the next day, I was like the popular kid in school. I'd been there by now, I'd only been there for 72 hours. And all of a sudden, I was like the baddest kid on the planet because I beat up the high school bully. And I never got into another fight after that. I didn't have to because I lived off that. And then after that, I just said, you know what, I got to learn how to do this a little more consistently. And I got into martial arts, and I started wrestling in high school or junior high. And it was then that I started growing into my body a little bit. I got a little bit more athletic, and between high school wrestling and martial arts, I was able to take care of myself after that. But it was that moment after getting banged on the back of my head for 40 minutes by Kenny Stockline on the school bus. So I said, I'm just done with this crap.
Man, that is a gem. And you had some martial arts background, because I remember you bringing that into the ring. So tell us a little bit about the martial arts background and your favorite part of the martial arts. I got a feeling it's going to be spiritual.
No, honestly, well, I'll back it up because you asked a couple questions there. I said when I was about 14 or 15, it was when I was exposed to martial arts the very first time. But I wasn't able financially. I didn't drive. I didn't have the money. I didn't have a car, whatever. So I dabble in it here and there when I could at the YMCA and whatnot. But it wasn't until I moved to Minnesota when I was about 16 or 17 years old. And by that time I was working. I had my own money. And I would literally take a bus from where I lived outside of Minneapolis, downtown, every day. I didn't have a car, so I had to take a bus. I would take a bus into downtown Minneapolis, and I started really, for the first time, really training in martial arts. And I loved it. And then had to move temporarily and kind of got back into it. Went to college, dabbled in it a little bit more. But it wasn't until I was about 22, 23, to about 23 years old that I was really able to seriously train and consistently train. And I loved it. It came, by that time, physically I was in pretty good shape. Again, after, wrestling high school and college and all that kind of stuff, I was more athletic. And I really started to understand the martial arts. But to be honest with you, and this isn't me sounding like a tough guy because at this stage of my life, I certainly am not. But at that stage of my life, I love knocking people out. I just do. And kicking someone in the head was the equivalent was the equivalent for me of hitting like a perfect note on a guitar. It was just that, because you knew, and I've never played a game of golf. I've never swung a golf club in my life, but I can only imagine that you swing that club and you make contact with the ball, and before it ever really leaves the tee, it's going to go exactly where you want it to go. To me, kicking someone in the head was that same kind of vibe, and I got addicted to it, for a long time.
Because there's a sweet spot. There's an art to it. There's angles. There's timing. There's, there is that. That's a really cool analogy you put to it there.
No, and it is, because you can't just call up and kick someone in the head, right? I mean, a kick comes from a long way away. It develops very slowly. I mean, even no matter how good of a kicker you are, or martial artist you are, you can see a kick coming unless you set it up. Plan it. It's kind of like a tactical, strategic kind of game. It's like chess, but you can't just haul off and kick someone in the head. They'll see it coming, especially a trained fighter. So you've got to work it. You got to plan it. It's an art. So yeah, I got addicted to that, and I had a really, really good left hand, and I'm right-handed, which is bizarre. But I developed, for whatever reason, and to this day, I mean, I got in a bar fight about a year and a half ago, and it ended, Well, it was over quick, but it's because of my left hand. To this day, if something drops off of it drops off of a table, even though I'm right-handed, I grab it with my left hand.
That's weird.
I can't explain it. Yeah, it is a little bizarre.
You know what's weird? I was saying to someone, like, if I got most people, I'm a righty, right? If I got a baseball mitt on, I'm going to go for it with my left. But if something falls, I'm going to go for it with my right.
It's strange. I mean, it's not like I'm 90, right? But still, at this stage of my life, I'm kind of aware that some of the shit that I used
to
got
the left.
I'm not able to do anymore. But it's like inevitably, something falls and it's like, bam, I snatch it out of midair with my left hand. If I try to do that with my right hand, I'd be wearing it. But whatever. I love martial arts. But, it's like everything else. I kind of grew out of it. And I was able to introduce it a little bit into my quote-unquote gimmick in wrestling. But by the time I did that, clearly my skill sets were diminished greatly because I don't work out, I don't train, I don't stretch, I don't do anything anymore. But it was still fun. It was a fun gimmick to have.
He said my gimmick. He goes, that was so funny, man. I was at WrestleCon, and at 2 different times, 2 guys came up to me and said, "Hey, I like your gimmick." I'm thinking to myself, what the hell are they saying to me right now? What is this, an insult?
I understand.
No, a gimmick is just something that people identify you with.
That's your look, your identity. That's your gimmick.
Yep.
I get that. So the world of wrestling gave us a lot of like big characters, big ideas, and huge marketing. What was the weirdest merchandise idea that's ever been pitched to you?
Wow, that's a good question, and I don't have a great answer. There was, nothing. First of all, when you look at merchandising, it's amazing what people buy. So the whole world of merchandising is kind of weird to begin with, because the things that you don't think would sell do.
Right.
Sometimes the things you think will sell don't. So I can't really recall anything that stands out as the weirdest idea, to be honest with you. I mean, nobody came to me, with condom ideas or anything bizarre. It was all pretty straightforward stuff, to be honest with you.
Oh, man, the Big Show would have been flying off the shelves, folks.
I'm not even going to respond to that because it'll take us into another conversation.
Right? So nobody wants to buy the Rey Mysterios. Oh man!
So I remember WWF had put out squirt heads. There was a Hulk Hogan squirt head, and it was just like basically the size of a baseball, and you hold it together underwater, and it loads up with water. And then it had like a gap tooth, like a Michael Strahan tooth, and it would shoot out the water. It was a hilarious toy.
That's goofy as hell.
That was a good one. Folks, Eric's got his new podcast out, Bischoff on Wrestling, and our buddy DDP, Jersey guy, DDP, Hall of Famer, DDP, is on the show this week. And I'm going to tweet that link. I'm going to share that link. Man, how good did it feel to induct Diamond Dallas Page into the Hall of Fame?
It was I'm really grateful for the experience and the opportunity because, for obvious reasons. I mean, to be up there in front of a WWE audience on television again it felt good. I'm a performer at heart, so to be able to kind of get back out there again and perform or be in front of a crowd. I wasn't really performing, but just to be in front of that live crowd and feel that energy was awesome.
Oh.
And to be a part, because I knew when I got the call, I think they called me back in January, February, I can't remember when, but it was a couple months. When they called me and asked me if I'd, be available to do it and willing to do it, I knew how much it would mean to Dallas. He's a very special guy. He's a very passionate guy. And that I knew that moment was going to be a seminal moment in his life. So to be invited to share in it was pretty badass.
Man, you guys come a long way together, man. All the way since WCW. You remember the first time meeting him?
Yeah, I do. In fact, I talked about it in the Hall of Fame. When he got to AWA, I had really only been in the AWA for maybe 6 months or a year. Can't remember. I came in '87. I think he showed up in the AWA in '88, and I thought he was a jackass. I mean, I didn't like it. He was loud. He was obnoxious. he was like sucked up all the attention in the room, and I just didn't really dig it. And one night after a television taping, we were both working for the AWA and, Virginia. And one of my jobs at that time was to work with local television stations and to promote the local shows and, just to help promote whatever we were doing.
Right.
And I had set up an event after a television taping with a couple local sponsors at a nightclub. So after the television taping was over, a bunch of the wrestlers and everybody went over, fans, and we were hanging out at a local nightclub. And Paige was his usually loud, obnoxious, gregarious self. And I was sitting in the corner with my wife and, having a couple beers, and I was a little edgy at that time, at that stage of my life. I had a short fuse. And the louder he got, the more pissed off I got. The more he drank, the louder he got. The more I drank, the more pissed off I got. And by the time the night was over, we ended up in a polo park, out in front of the bar. And because there were wrestlers there were people there, and they pulled us off of each other, and it's like, okay, it's over. I'm gonna forget about it. I'm gonna go back in the bar and finish my beer. And I did. And then my wife, I went to the hotel and got in the elevator. We're going up to our room. And sure enough, as the elevator doors open, there's Diamond Dallas Page. And then we just went at it again. We went at it again.
Like a hardcore match.
Yeah. Another pull apart. Nothing really bad happened. And then, of course, I woke up the next morning and went, oh, God, I was kind of an ass. I should have never done that. First of all, I was afraid I'd get fired because Vern Gagne had figured out that I was, that kind of a person. I was a little fearful of my job, and I liked my job. So I thought, okay, how do I fix this? So I thought, I got to eat crow. I was a jerk. I threw the first punch or whatever. I need to go fix this. So I went to Paige's room the next morning, and he was hungover, and so was I. Neither one of us really wanted to see each other. And I knocked on his door, and he came to the door looking like death warmed over. And so did I. And I said, brother, it's my bad. I was out of line, and I apologize. And we shook hands. We shook hands, and that was the end of it. And I didn't see him again until my audition in WCW. Wow. And I found out that he was going to be the guy that I had to audition with. And he was just the coolest. Yeah, he was just, he bent over backwards. He'd already been in WCW, so he'd already, he bent over backwards to help me. And rather than burying me or, doing what wrestlers are known to do, which is, to pull the rug out from underneath you, so to speak, he went the other way, and he did everything he could to help get the gig, and I did.
That's awesome. That is awesome to hear. And that's awesome to hear your history, man. And then to see it end on the Hall of Fame stage, not end, but have that chapter on the Hall of Fame stage, inducting him in. A lot of times when we have some of the Raiders Hall of Famers on, they talk about the guys that inducted them and what that meant to them. And I asked them to compare playing for John Madden as opposed to Tom Flores. What would you say could you compare working with Vince McMahon and working with Ted Turner? Was Ted Turner involved? Were you and him involved together regularly?
No, it's kind of a misconception or urban narrative. I had met Ted at Christmas parties and bigger corporate events, and maybe had one or two individual meetings with him.
No pull-aparts.
No pull-aparts, and there was no, Ted and I didn't sit down and kind of strategize how to, put WWE out of business or any of the things that people like to talk about and think about. That never happened.
Right.
I had probably really only one significant business meeting with Ted, and the rest of the time it was just, kind of corporate social stuff.
And then with Vince, what was it like when you guys came together? What's one gem you take out of that relationship between you guys?
Respect. I really, I hate to admit this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I wasn't mature enough, or knowledgeable enough about the history of the WWE, of the McMahon family, to be respectful of them when I was competing against them, which is probably one of the reasons why I did some of the crazy crap I did. And it worked, so I'm not taking any of it back, and I wouldn't have done anything.
Right, you can't be worried about that when you're competing.
But when I got there and I had put all that behind me, I really was able, because by that time, I was more mature, I was more experienced, and I did look at the world a different way. I was able to really see just how significant of an impact, not significant, how massive of an impact that Vince McMahon had in his vision. And not only his vision, because in some ways I still think to this day I'm more creative than him. I would arm wrestle him creatively all day long, in my opinion. But in terms of building a business and having a vision and then executing on that, he's in a class all of his own. And seeing that and being able to see it and experience it firsthand was really enlightening for me.
Yeah, that has to be such a special relation. That's going to be a great episode of your podcast when you and Vince lock horns. That's going to be. What are some of the episodes you got coming up that you're going to be pumped about, man? Oh my God, the whole WCW series is going to be incredible.
I don't plan much. I kind of take it a day at a time.
Just let it flow.
I just let it flow. We target a couple people, maybe a week or 2 weeks in advance sometimes. But, everybody's so busy and everybody's got a podcast. And I don't like to plan too much, because then you get bogged down with, trying to, fix the things that you thought were going to happen that aren't. So I just kind of take it, I don't want to say a day at a time, but maybe 2 days at a time.
Maybe 2 days at a time. Yeah, I hear you. That's how you got to do it.
Yep.
And that's wrestling, right? That you guys were planning those things week to week. That's the best way to keep things creative, I think, on a fly as the things actually happen. It's real entertaining, and man, I can't wait to watch Bischoff on Wrestling develop and continue to follow it. And folks, if you want to follow Eric on Twitter, his handle is eBischoff. That's EBISCHOFF. And man, I'm so happy we got to meet. I could talk your ear off all day. And I thank you so much for taking the time to check in with us.
Thank you, man. It's been a pleasure.
Before you go, what do you got to say to Raider Nation?
Raider Nation, I can't wait to come to Vegas and have a beer with you.
And I'll make mine a Spirit of the Wild West. Thank you very much.
There you go.